everyone, thank you for watching the latest edition of Client Horror Stories. And I'm honored to have the one and only Will Rico with me today. I don't know the story that he's going to tell me, but he just said it is indelible, which makes me doubly excited to hear it. Welcome to our podcast, Will.
Oh, thank you, Morgan. It's always such a pleasure to chat with you. And so, I learned so much and it's entertaining. So hopefully I have a good story to share.
I try to mix learning and entertainment. There's actually a Cicero quote that the best way to learn is through entertainment. But I forget the Latin. My Latin is fading from my mind. but let's jump right into your indelible horror story. Yeah. What happened, Will?
All right. So, when you approached me with talking about a client horror story, I just started to get the wheels turning in my mind. And I was trying to think, the story immediately came to me because it was a big part of my life. And I've been trying to recollect the story the last few days for myself. So I'd be prepared to share it with you here today. And I think one thing that's interesting for me is in my mind, like this is like a 3-year story. But I actually went back and I was looking at like my notes and my records and I was like, oh my God, like this is actually like a 9-year story. This goes all the way back to 2001, if you can believe that. So I have to even like think about, well, in 2001, like where was I and what I was doing. And so my agency, CommonMind, we're a digital marketing agency, but back in 2001, we actually existed and we were more of a web development and IT type company. And so our agency's been around for quite some time in a few different, permutations and just kind of, starts and false starts and steps backwards, etc. But in 2001, I was in this period of having failed at starting a .com company that became a .bomb company, and just with the kind of remnants of that business, just trying to do whatever I could to make money. So that would be like building websites for other businesses. We would do anything though. We built like Microsoft Access databases. We would go to people's offices. Go to people's offices in Manhattan and we would be running wires and, Ethernet cables. There wasn't Wi-Fi back then, and networking computers. And so I had a very I kind of came from this .com experience where we had like a specific idea to, okay, now we need to make some money. We have like debt, which to me, it was like a ton of debt. It was like, I think it was like $30,000, but it wasn't in retrospect, like the end of the world, but I was just trying to do whatever I could to just make money. And my thought or lack of thought was that eventually we'd kind of slot into a particular service area and we would just sort of organically grow. But one of the mistakes then was just kind of doing so many different things and not saying no to anything. Kind of thinking back to that time frame, just to set up the context of how this client situation came about.
But by the way, we want to interrupt for a second. Yeah. One general comment is I'm a big fan of niche focused targeted companies. And what I hadn't realized until you said it is if you're not niche and you're a generalist, you're more likely to have client horror stories. If only because you're doing a little bit of everything, you won't really master the art of one, nor the art of managing that particular type of client. Exactly. So I hadn't realized that, but this is a good meta observation about client horror stories.
It's 100% true. And I think, there's that, that technical capability, which, I feel we did have. It was more like, how do you manage those types of clients? Exactly. Building a website is different than managing installing a computer network. And I mean, it's kind of almost humorous in retrospect, because there would be days where I'd like block out time to work on some like website, and I'd get a phone call from someone on the other side of Manhattan who like their computer wasn't connecting to the network, and I'd literally have to like get up, go over there, and like plug the Ethernet wire back in and come back to my office. So yeah, definitely just knowing how to manage that was something I lacked. And just like, again, like context, I think in 2001, I think I was like 27 or so years old, if I'm doing the math right on my age. And so yeah, 20, yes, 27. So I was renting office space from my first boss when I was in high school. And in high school, I used to assemble computers, and this like kind of really eccentric computer store that was by appointment only. It didn't have a storefront. You'd have to know about it and like take the elevator up the building. And the guy who ran the computer store, like he was very eccentric and, you know, fiery. And, you know, we did everything. It wasn't just built assembling computers. A lot of it was like cleaning the office, like vacuuming, getting like lunch and all that sort of stuff. And it was kind of all intertwined with lots of yelling and screaming. So like, you know, he was either yelling and screaming at us, meaning like kind of the kids who did everything, or he was like yelling and screaming at the vendors from whom he would like be buying computer parts. And I mean, it was kind of like exciting and comical, but also like, you know, stressful. And so like, you know, we would go pick up lunch at like McDonald's or something, and if it was actually Roy Rogers back then, and we had to ask for,
I remember Rogers.
Exactly, we had to ask for an empty coffee cup, and then supposed to go over to the ketchup counter and like pump the full coffee cup full of ketchup because he would like to dunk his fries. It wasn't good enough. Like he didn't want the little thing. And then if you didn't do that, like, you know, like you'd get like, you know, screamed at and etc. But and it's kind of, so fast forward, that's high school. This is like, you know, 10 years after high school. I'm renting office space from this guy, and like my colleagues at the time, they all hated him, you know, because he was like very nosy, very intrusive, like very you know, just abrasive. You know, I knew him and I could like, you know, we had a history, a relationship, so it wasn't quite so bad, but he could be, it was also this thing of like every deal with him, it was he'd come up with a great deal where he'd get like 90% and you'd get 10%. So I'm just kind of setting up some context. So one day I've known
more than one person like that.
Exactly. So one day you know, I'm in my little cubicle working there, and he comes back, and I forget where he was, and by this time he had like an internet cafe, and so I forget exactly how this connection was made, but he met this gentleman who told him, look, I have a relationship with a big computer manufacturer, and I get a lot of leads from this computer manufacturer, but what I do is like these like enterprise like software engagements, and this big computer manufacturer, when their sales reps get something that's more like, you know, installing some PCs or building a website, like I don't do any of that, you know, and I want to come up with a deal with you where you're going to do this and you'll pay me a commission and I'll feed you these leads like from this big computer manufacturer. So the fiery eccentric guy, boss, he invites me to lunch because he can't do any of this stuff. He just doesn't have the wherewithal to do
I
it.
see. So this guy said it to your boss, not to you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
just want to be clear.
Yes, yeah.
Got it.
So I said I was going to use like pseudonyms, but maybe I'll call it the sophisticated software guy like David. So David says to fiery eccentric boss, like, I can give you all these leads. Exactly. Fiery eccentric boss says to me, look, come with me to lunch. You'll do the work, and then I'll get like whatever it is, like 80%. And then, we'll pay whatever percent to David, and, it'll be great. So, I'm a little bit skeptical, but this David gentleman, he was, in my view at the time, like being like, 27 years old, he was very like sophisticated. He was an older gentleman. He's like probably at that point like late 50s. He had like gray hair. He had like a foreign accent, and like kind of some of the kind of the traits of success, right? Or the characteristics of success. And you have a nice like lunch, and he's charming, and he explains how this is all going to work. And all right, that's fine. So fiery eccentric boss gets like 1 or 2 leads coming in, and does his normal thing, and gets into like a big fight with like the prospect. So David like calls me up, and he says, Will, like, I really enjoyed meeting you at lunch. And, but, these relationships I have with this computer manufacturer, like, they're the heart of my business. And if we're, aggravating the leads that they give us, they're not going to give us any more leads anymore. I don't have any patience for this. I told, your boss, like, we're not going to work together anymore. And I'm really sorry. I was like, well, and in that conversation, well, he's not really my boss. Like, and I'm a separate company. He just brought me in, because, I'm able to do the web work, and he can't do it. And so he's like, oh, I didn't realize that. Like, and so why don't I just work directly with you? And in my mind, like, and I think this is where, just going all the way back, this is a 9-year story.
Yeah.
This is probably where I made like the real first, the critical mistake was agreeing.
You bit the apple.
Exactly. I bit the apple, because in my mind, like, I was like, I was really annoyed at fiery eccentric boss and had been for like, years. And then also I was thinking, what, like, I can get along with anybody. I can get along with both of them. And at some point I'll be able to like reconcile and like bring everybody back together.
Oh, okay. By the way, this is definitely the Adam biting the apple moment. What's interesting about this is, I was just like you at 27, where I really thought everyone can just get along. It's just a communication problem,
right?
And there's always the win-win. And unfortunately, it takes a few horror stories and growing up to realize sometimes you just can't win. So you either need to go in knowing it's going to be destructive, or stay out of the battle completely.
Exactly.
And also a second good learning or observation based on what you said is, I get goosebumps with hearing you biting the apple at this moment, because when you're 27, it's not just that you realize sometimes there is no win situations, but it's that, going around someone doing that when you're 27, you think, whatever, he couldn't do it, I'll do it. Right. Like it's fine. Like, he clearly can't do it. He's going to lose the business anyway. But the human heart and emotion is such so that like anyone, like even no matter how much of an asshole he was and how wrong he was, right, like he'll always be angry at you for that. And this is what we realize now, but you just can't. It's just it takes a level of sophistication that very few 27-year-olds have, and definitely not me at 27 to realize that.
And definitely not me. I mean, there are people who I meet people all the time who say they don't have any regrets in life. Like I definitely have regrets in life, and this is one of the regrets. And
whenever anyone tells me that they don't have any regrets, I either think they're lying to me, or they're lying to themselves.
Right. So that's a fair way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So go on.
So David and I, the sophisticated, software guy, like, we start to develop like this relationship, and he would give me these leads coming from like the big software, manufacturer. And then I would do those projects. But there was always this kind of like quid pro quo type aspect to it, where my website, his website in this context, this guy created it for me and he screwed me over and it did a really bad job. Like, can you like do the website for me?
So David asked for the quid pro quo in addition to a commission.
Yeah. In fact, I think over time, like, I can't remember, we were giving him a commission, but it became like kind of secondary. Like the primary component was a lot of these, like what I would call like kind of free services or support or discounted services. So, we built like a website, redesigned a website for him, probably would have charged like another client like $6,000, but, charged him $1,500. And so, and then, kind of went on like this. He was a photographer. Oh, yeah.
This is actually a super interesting situation, and none of my previous interviews have discussed a situation like this, where often, and I've been in similar situations where what the other person wants isn't really money, but instead there's sort of this like quid pro quo, or this unspoken, okay, I scratch your back, you scratch my back, and this is also another risk factor for explosion, because then it's like less clear, less documented, and like the ambiguity can lead to lots of problems.
Exactly, and so there was a lot of ambiguity, and he, this is kind of an aspect of it, that David was a photographer and he took some beautiful photography. So he had this business website, which was about like, the sophisticated software systems, but then there's also like this giant photo gallery on there. So like every single week, like, we, as in like me and my small team, like, we're putting up like more photos, and like, it's just like, it's kind of like becomes a bit of a mix between like a personal exercise and a business exercise. But I think where like the positive aspect of it is, through David, I got like maybe like 4 really good clients, like really great clients that I got from them, and some big projects, like, at least for me at the time, these are projects that are probably in like the $30,000 to $50,000 like range, which were big projects for us. And this is over the course of like, this like 9-year, period getting. And the way it would work is like, one of those did come from the computer manufacturer. It turns out most of those leads were kind of not that great, or they didn't really pan out. It was more that he was a very like charming like networker. So he'd be networking all the time in New York City, and he'd meet someone, and then he'd say, I want you to meet my young friend, Will. He's so brilliant. He's going to help you with this or with that. And so then I'd meet somebody else, and that person would be a good contact and would, give me a lead. And so, but that lead was always then going to be like the gift from David.
Exactly.
So even if it was like what, like, you know, I would meet like, you know, George, and George was a great guy, and we'd develop a relationship. And after some period of trust, George would introduce me to, you know, client X. Well, like David would say, well, remember I introduced you to George. George introduced you to client X. Like, you know, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be working for client X.
Yeah,
So,
but this is a really good lesson. By the way, I've had the same sort of issues with people long ago, and
yeah,
part of the power of formal contracts is that they force you to think through issues like this.
mm-hmm.
Let's define a commission. Does it go 1 level, 2 levels, 3 levels,
mm-hmm.
and there are formal structures around this. Often with commissions, it's like
Right.
only people you introduce me to, only for 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and or with an introduction from an introduction, you know, there's like a commission that's half the size, or
right,
like
right.
There are lots of ways to deal with this, but when it's the informal quid pro quo, then
Mm-hmm.
then 20 years ago, I introduced you to this person, therefore you owe me one, bro.
Exactly. And it was, and so what wound up happening is, because again, okay, like I don't think this is like a bygone era, but at that time, like when we were developing websites for clients, we would also host the websites.
Yes.
So I had like at one point I had like 6 servers at a network, you know, co-location facility. We were hosting a whole bunch of websites, and we hosted, you know, David's website. And of course, when you host back then, and again, this has changed, but back then when you hosted websites, you also hosted email. Okay.
Yes.
So David was, you know, I mean, he was it turned out he's very high strung. Okay. So I would get phone calls like at any time of day or night. I mean, I'm talking like before 5 a.m. in the morning, the phone would ring, and he'd be like, you know, Will, my email's down. You know, I can't be operating this way. You're putting me out of business. Like, you know, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you know, of course, like the email's not down. I mean, we were like not the most sophisticated hosting operation, but, you know, I've got like 30, you know, 30, you know, companies that are hosting email with us. Like if the email was down, somebody along the chain, either like at the network operations center or some alert or like one of the other 29 clients. Exactly. Right. So then you go through this whole like rigmarole of like, you know, are you connected to the internet? Like, you know, can you reboot the computer? You know, you'd also have the thing like in Outlook where he'd be like just clicking refresh on the email, like, you know, OCD, and it would like time out something. So, you know, just like all of these things.
Unplug the router, replug the router.
Exactly. You know, and there were times too where, I mean, not, it didn't occur, I can't say at 5 a.m., but there were times where it's like, okay, all right, I'll just like come over to your apartment and like, you know, fix the computer. And it was never like, I mean, of all of these incidents with the email, which were like frequent, like as in, if not weekly, like every like 2 or 3 weeks, there'd be like a angry phone call that the email's down. Like they were, you know, not one time that I could recall was the email actually was the actual down. And it was the same thing, like, because we did like the, you know, SEO for the website. Like if there was like and we were managing Google ads for the website, like if there was a period of time where the leads had like slowed down or dried up, it would be the phone call, like, you know, I'm not getting any leads, you're putting me out of business. Like, you know, you're too busy now because George introduced you to this client, and you're working for them, and now you're not working for me. And, you know, so it'd be that whole like rigmarole and that whole, you know, ball of stress. And then, you know, I think the worst part for me as like a young person, and I didn't realize any of this, like during the time, like when I had this relationship with David, my perspective was he was a warm, like charming person. I thought he was like basically a little bit crazy. Like, you know, he's just like a little bit nutty. And like, I would just kind of like not take it personally. Like I wouldn't like, internalize it, like, because I knew it was like BS. Like
Right.
I would just like, all right, I just gotta like, talk through this whole thing. The part that was really difficult was the time suck. Like it was just so much time, and a lot. I just remember at one point I lived in Washington Heights, which is in Upper Manhattan,
I remember
100
Washington
and
Heights.
yeah, 171st Street. And on Saturday, I would like take the subway, and we didn't do as much remote back then, so I would like take the
Right.
subway downtown to my office because I needed to catch up on invoicing. I was always behind schedule on invoicing. So, and I'd go down there. And then as soon as I got there, like inevitably the phone would ring, either email problem, we needed to plan out a new section of the website, or there was like some other project that David would want to like work on. So I'd be like, spend like 2 hours on the phone with him. And then also there were these, he would tend to go on these long stories. Like, he was like mentoring me, so he'd tell me some long story like from the past. And eventually you see the theme. Most of the stories were he helped somebody, this person wound up being ingrateful, and now he hates that person. And like, what did he do to like get revenge on that person, and now he never talks to that person again. And it could be like, it could be a business relationship, it could be a friendship, it could be, one time he had a niece who was like 20 years old, and she was coming from this other country where they're from to visit him, and she said how much she loved him and she wanted to spend time with him. But when she got there, she wound up going out with her friends. And so then, she didn't have dinner with him. So then, and his wife. And so he was so angry that like, he cut her off. It's like, so all of these stories like this. And I think like in my mind, I was like, I think he was surprised. Like his wife was the sweetest woman ever. She was just such like an angel. And so like I think they were both kind of surprised that like this relationship between me and David lasted so long, because these relationships that he would have like didn't tend to last. And in my mind, I was just like, oh, I'm saying this sounds like ridiculous to say, but in my mind, I was like, I'm just a really nice person and I can get along with anybody. And I will, I'm just, able to like ride the waves and appreciate like the good side, and, and not be in conflict. And that's why we're able to get along, despite this kind of nuttiness that was going
And
on.
so, by the way, I love the story. Different than the previous ones, but it's like it's really a pain point I've also suffered from. And by the way, I told myself the same thing. Oh no, I'm a nice guy. There's so many assholes there.
Right.
So like that's how I justified it and explained it. I think a good learning that I didn't realize when I was in my 20s, have only started realizing in my 30s, is some people are just massive time sucks. Time and energy sucks. Yeah. And this was a powerful lesson for me with business life and personal life. Like there's some people I know outside of business, like friends, acquaintances, where there's just like always a disaster problem where like they just need me to help console them and figure it out and talk through it. And on the friendship level, when like I love helping my friends and I support them and I like that, and I think I'm good at that. And when 99% of the entire relationship is you doing that and then zero else, it reaches a point where it gets a bit too much. And it's the same in business, where here it's a bad situation and it's a horror because it was a quid pro quo. You weren't even making money in any reasonable way for him. But even when you are making money from someone, sometimes it's just such an emotional and hourly time suck that you're like, dude, the money's not keep the money.
Right, exactly. And I think in my mind too, at that time, I really did see him as a mentor, like because he had a successful company. and he had success, and he told me he was going to help me, like, figure out like my business problems. And I was like, so confused. And as I'd explained, like not having a real niche, and doing a lot of different things, and just also being at that point in your agency where you're like super busy, but you don't have quite enough money to hire somebody, or you don't perceive that you have enough money to hire somebody. So you're very unsure what to do. And so we'd go out to dinner and we'd have these long dinners. And the idea would be that he was going to like help me solve my problems. But actually what would wind up happening is he'd like tell some anecdote, like of some like unrelated story, again, like usually ending with like someone, quote unquote, like screwing him over, and then the relationship falling apart. And we'd never get to this.
But by the way, I want to make another good learning is telling stories about people screwing them over, and then the revenge you got could be interpreted as a threat. Like, hey, if you ever stop showing your eternal gratitude, you got one penny through. Right, so because I gave you one penny for the rest of your life, you need to be kissing my feet. Yeah. And if you don't, here's how I'll punish you. Like there's a subtle subtext there of that. Yes. But like maybe there's a reason why he's telling you a story, because he doesn't want you to stop being grateful for that one penny he threw your way.
Exactly. That's a really good observation, and one that I probably wouldn't even like. I didn't even like verbalize that in my own mind until you said that, but I think that's definitely true. And one thing that he would say a lot about people he had fallings out with is this person was a manipulating manipulator. That was like one of his like big insults. And I can't tell you, Morgan, it's like it took me until after my relationship like ended with him, and then like reflecting on it, that I realized like how manipulative he was. Yes. And that I was being manipulated. Like I was actually the executor of his will.
No.
I was in his will. He had no children, and he had cut off the niece, and like, so there was really like, I was like gonna inherit.
Did he at least leave you money?
He would, well, I mean, not after the falling out, but in the will, I was supposed to inherit like the country home and like a whole and some other things.
This story is getting exciting. We've like jumped close to the end. So I want to hear what happened. It's not everything business relationship where it's in the will to inherit the country house.
And at some point too, like my brother got involved. My brother is like even younger than me. He's like 6 years younger. And my brother, he used to do some, again, craziness. Don't do this. Don't try to don't diversify early, because we were still doing that network and PC support. And my brother would work for me doing that. But in David's case, I would say just work directly for him. So my brother was going to his apartment all the time, fixing things and et cetera. But I think what really happened for me is like my business hit like this rock bottom point in like 2007. I had lost, like, we had one developer, full-time developer who'd been working for us for like 4 or 5 years. He was like a rock star and awesome. And I was actually at this point where I had hired like finally like 2 great like freelance programmers to work with my rock star. And then I was trying to like get that up to like full time and grow the team. And then I just like kind of missed the timing. And my rock star programmer, he called me one day and said, "I'm sorry, I accepted a position at another company, and I'm starting in 2 weeks." And at this point, we were doing like some fairly sophisticated like web-based applications with custom e-commerce applications, and like 2 weeks was not enough time to transition from like this brain brain trust to anybody else. And so it was like extremely like stressful. And in the course, and I should have closed the business at that time. I wound up like through David meeting a company that was like an outsourcing company, and they had some programmers in India. And so I hired that company. They like completely, thank God this was something that I did that was correct finally, is that I didn't at that point. I was like, oh, I just met them. They seem very charming, but I'd have never worked with them before. And I'm going to be like 100% transparent with my clients about this company. So the first client that was interested, I was like, you pay them like directly, and I'll manage the project and help you manage it, but I haven't worked with them before. So ... like that actually almost became like $100,000 lawsuit between the client and this company that didn't deliver on what they promised. And the only reason it didn't become a lawsuit was because lawsuits are so expensive. It wasn't worth it for the client. And this is a very short version of that story, like a story within a story. But I think it's important to mention because that client and I are still friends to this day. Like they never held it against me because they were completely invested in the decision of hiring this company. But how it impacted me is just more just like another like wrong turn in this entire like period where the business was really struggling. And so I had another company I was introduced to in Minsk, and I outsourced some stuff to them, and they did fantastic work. So I wound up like transitioning almost all of my clients to the client and the contractor in Minsk. I had one other local like New York friend who is a really great programmer, and he is the author of some open source like modules that we use or programming frameworks, and transitioned some other clients to him. And I like exited the web development space, and that's how I moved into doing, focusing finally on like Google ads and SEO. And with that kind of changed, like my kind of, I feel like, I don't know, my relationship with David changed. And he got, and I'm still doing work for him, but he got this, and this is, so he got this grant from the computer manufacturer where he was getting all the leads from. And it was like one of those marketing co-ops. And it was like, I forget, it was like $20,000 or $30,000. And he could use some of that for his website. So he said, and they would pay the vendor directly. So the money didn't go to him. So, but this was the first time like there was real money flowing from him to my company. Prior to that, like there were little things like when we would upload photos, I would charge him like my cost, like of what my contractor would charge me. I charge him the exact price to upload the photos. But like this was the first time I was charging him real money to do something. And like I kind of knew it at the time, but I was thinking to myself,
you're probably freaked.
I was like, I've been doing this for like 8 years, working on this website, like, for nothing. And now there's this like free money from this computer manufacturer and to redo the site, and I'm just going to take the money and do it. And I'm like, there's a high probability that he's going to flip out because now there's real money involved. Yes. And that's pretty much what happened. Like we redid the website. It was like beautiful. In fact, I've tried to like not look back on this too much, but I went to the website today and believe it or not, it still pretty much looks like
identical.
what we had done. I mean, it's changed a little bit, but like structurally, it's essentially like, just like an iterations beyond what we had done. So we redid the website, I mean, I had like 1,000 photos that had to like be re-uploaded and formatted and stuff, and all these other things. And at the end of it, I forget what his complaint was, but it was like, you got all this money from me, I'm not getting leads, or I met like XYZ at a networking event and they said that the website was crap or something like that. And I wish I could remember like the whole like big like fight that we had about this, but it was the first time that I actually like really pushed back on him. And he was very, very aggressive, like yelling and screaming, very like insulting. And I was like, well, I don't have like the time or patience for this anymore. I'm not, going to like continue this or continue talking to you. And so like I hung up on him, and that was like the end. That was like, and I remember it too. It was like my dog was like in the hospital, and or at the vet hospital. She was elderly, and he was screaming at me while I was waiting for like the vet to come back. And I was just like, that's it. Like, I'm done. I'm like out. And that was the end of the whole
9-year
thing. Yeah, the whole 9 years. Yeah.
One of the interesting parts about the ending is that the way he sold himself to for these 9 years was that it was all about your relationship with him. Like, he'll tell you stories, go out to dinner. It's all about the relationship. But after 9 years of a relationship, like, a penny is involved, and because the penny's involved, he'll kill 9 years of relationship,
right?
Which actually means the whole 9 years of relationship, like, it wasn't really about the relationship. It was just a strategy to save for him to save pennies.
Right. And it was, and I didn't realize it too. Now it's very like crystal clear, and is, he's actually like a narcissist by like clinical definition. Like, I've read up on narcissism, and like one day I was reading an article on the plane, like in one of those like plane magazines, and it had like a checklist, how to know if you're a narcissist or how to know if your loved one's a narcissist. And I was like, if you get like 5 out of these 10, you are a narcissist. And I like, he got like 10 out of 10 when I went through the survey. and it kind of like, in retrospect, like, I didn't even know what that term was, but it is a particular personality type where what he understood of me was more a projection of what he wanted me to be than it was like of who I truly was. Like, because I didn't really get to talk that much. I was just kind of like a nice, like, blank slate. I was like, like, he would assume my problem was X and try to help me solve X. My problem was never what he assumed it was. It might be something else. And so, yeah, there was like, the relationship was more like in his mind and me playing along with it than there was like a real relationship. And that's like where, again, like, my mistake of not recognizing that and getting into this, very bizarre situation.
It's less bizarre than you would think. I haven't been in that situation. I have been in weaker, like, take the 5% strong version of that situation. And have had comparable ones, vaguely comparable ones. So a few interesting things. On the narcissism, there's definitely a sort of checklist. If every single person that you surround yourself with has massive problems and you don't have any, but he sucks. Right. Like, maybe the problem isn't everyone that you've ever surrounded yourself with.
Right.
So but what's interesting about that is, I'll admit, I'm a sucker for Myers-Briggs, that these different personality profiles, there could be truth to it. And knowing that, okay, someone falls into the narcissist pattern or this pattern or an INTP pattern, etc., then like that can help you understand, okay, it's this type of person, so I can act in this sort of way and manage them in that sort of way, like that. So this is like, so recognizing these patterns, and often like when you're 27, you just haven't had enough experience in life to be able to smell the patterns as early as you need to.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah, now it's
So,
easy, but you can't go back in time. So.
exactly. Exactly. This is a powerful story. So,
Yeah.
I especially love that you were going to inherit. But I actually, knowing how it ended, maybe you were never actually going to inherit anything.
Right.
Like maybe that sounds like part of
I
him.
knew I was going to inherit because I met with the lawyer, and the lawyer was
Oh,
a
really?
very nice guy. Like, and he was a very straight shooter. Like he was like he wore a bow tie. It was like very this persona of like very moral person. I know there are some people who present themselves that way, but behind the scenes aren't. But he was a very
Yeah.
like up and up, like trustworthy guy. And yeah, I was there. I mean, I signed the papers for like
Oh,
being the
wow.
executor of the will and everything. So I know I was what I was like, but I was like, it's not worth it.
Wow.
Like I cannot like
Not worth
continue. Like just money is not that important, and if it wasn't like this, it was going to be something else. It was just like too much. Now I think I should have realized
it.
that after like 2 months or 10 months instead, or 9 months instead of 9
9 years.
years.
But
But that, eventually I
I
did realize it.
I want to emphasize
Yeah.
the will point because that's also powerful. One unique. I've never heard of anyone wanting to basically reward someone for work by putting in their will. Not just putting in their will. You met the lawyers. You signed
Right,
the
right.
papers. So
Yeah.
so like that. Like I think if I were telling your story, I would like build up to that as the like a climax. That's the in the
Yeah.
movie version.
Right,
That's
right.
like
Yeah.
the critical moment.
Yeah.
But what's powerful about that is in this narcissist personality,
Mm-hmm.
he does want to pay you and reward you, and he knows you are working hard. He
Mm-hmm.
knows you're putting in all this time, and he knows he calls you at 5 a.m. You're difficult to deal with, so he knows he should pay you. But I'm such a cheap asshole. How can I pay him all the money he deserves?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but without actually me having to sacrifice anything. Oh,
Mm.
I know. When I die, like in his mind, it's the perfect win-win.
Right,
I can
right, right.
pay him. He live a freaking $1 million house.
Right.
Like he'll actually get a lot of money, but I actually don't really need to give anything until I'm 6 feet under.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, those calculations, right? And sometimes you may not be conscious of them, but he may not have been conscious of them, but his brain like worked it out that it would work, would wind up that way.
And actually, I think for a final point, I just want to emphasize what you just said now, because what you said is a minor point, but I think is important, which is you said he might not be conscious of it. That often when people like him are completely taking advantage of you, 9 years, like not good at all, but he may not have been conscious of it because we have this image of the bad guy.
Right.
We think the bad guy is
Exactly.
I can save $1 and I can take advantage of the poor peasant.
Right, right.
But like that caricature just doesn't exist. What I think is much more the case is the case of how he acts. A little bit here, a little bit there, then not doing this little thing, then this little taking advantage, then this other little taking advantage, and this boiling over time. While in his mind, because it's boiling the frog, when you boil the frog, it's not. It's just a tiny little degree more of warmth.
Yeah.
That it's not like I'm not doing an asshole. I didn't steal money from him. It's just one little degree more. That's like, oh, he has time. He likes helping me. He likes my stories. So it's powerful to remember that the bad behavior often isn't conscious behavior.
Right. I think that's true 100%. Like the person doesn't even know that they're doing it. And I would just want to mention two other, I think, quickly, because I think they it was a very bad experience. And I think like there's that regret because, I feel like I was manipulated in this, and taken advantage of. But, other than now, like I feel like I'm dwelling on it at the moment, but mostly I don't think about it. But a couple of things. There were like a couple of people in that time frame that like give some hope, like for me and for humanity in a sense. You know, he had like one of the people he introduced me to was this like business and sports psychologist, like a much, he was much older than David. And he had a falling out with this guy kind of like a little bit before his falling out with me, and I forget what it was about, but before that, this business and sports psychologist was just sort of like such a respected, you know, individual. And so one day after the falling out with me, he sees the psychologist at a business networking event, and he said, you know, I have to tell you what happened with Will. Like, he did this to me, he screwed me over, blah blah blah. And the business and sports psychologist just said, put up his hand and said, you know, don't talk to me about Will. I know who Will is. Like, you know, and he's my friend, and I don't want it. Just stop. And I was like, you know, like that, like, you know, they're just some people who are just really like good-hearted in a way, you know, and like, and I still have that person in my life, like as a, you know, not someone I talk to like, you know, too regularly, but just, you know, just that as in like an example. And I think too, like, you know, that was a mistake I made, because as bad as my crazy like boss was, like, you know, I mean, I think I wish like when I was 27, like that's what I said, like, well, don't talk to me about my crazy boss that way. Like, even though he's crazy, whatever, he's still, you know, my friend. And even like coming back, like, well, you know, every so often the crazy boss would ask me, hey, whatever happened to that guy? You know, did you still work with him? It's like, yeah, like here and there, he'd give me a project, whatever. But, you know, and I never, you know, I kept every, you know, because I, you know, obviously didn't want to like rattle that cage. But, you know, we didn't talk too much, and it wasn't so much connected to this, but every so often, and we had a couple of like little like business dealings here and there, and you know, and he was the type of person, he was this fiery, like screaming at us kids about like dunking the ketchup, and we would, you know, we couldn't vacuum, we had to like take tape and pick up lint from the rug. It was like crazy. But then over in the years, he really like softened, and so he became like very like sweet, and he would like call me every so often. And like and he wound up very sadly getting cancer, and he gave me this like website that he had been working on for many years. And I gave him a little bit of money for it, and he said, how much money do you want to give me for it? I told him the amount. He said, he called me up and he said, look, I'm actually going to hospice. I'm going to pass away. I want you to, the money that you were going to give me, it was like $2,500. He said, instead, I want you to take $2,000 and you give it to my brother, and take $500 and go out to dinner with your wife to like the best restaurant that you can find.
Wow. That's powerful.
Yeah.
A few comments on that. When you started the story and there was like the eccentric boss,
yeah,
and then his friend,
yeah,
I didn't know where it was going. So what's interesting is like you never kind of know who turns out to be the good guy and who turns out to be the bad guy.
Right.
Like in the beginning, it sounded like, oh, the weird boss is trying to take advantage, structure everything 90-10, but his elegant friend would be the good guy.
Right.
But like a lifetime later, like you realize actually the precise opposite. And I think that's a very powerful lesson, that no matter how good you are at sniffing the clues, life is full of surprises, and also people do change, both for the better and for the worse.
Exactly, 100%. And sometimes the outward, like we're as a society, and I say maybe as a culture or as a subset of our culture, like, and it's not just me, I think others were conflict averse. Right. So like the fiery eccentric guy was full of conflict, and it makes you uncomfortable and you don't know how to deal with it. But then there's like the more elegant, like, David character is much more like passive aggressive in a way. As like much more like a drip here, a drip there, or manipulative. And, I mean, not to say like not every situation you could put into bucket A or bucket B, and bucket B is always bad and A is always good. But, sometimes like this like immediate conflict is actually healthier than like a like simmering, like, let's avoid this. Let's just, hope we can like, like you paint over it type of a scenario. So that's another, another lesson in the whole.
And by the way, that last lesson, I strongly agree with. I often tell people like, I'm not passive aggressive. I'm just aggressive. And like to me, like either I'm really nice or I'm really aggressive. And like, I think there's a time and a place for both, at least for me. I just can't stand that simmering passive, that little comment, that building anger. Like no, like either be happy or like get the anger out and like rap, leave, or finish up. Or so
exactly.
Any other concluding lessons, observations, or
I think the last thing I say is like choose your mentors wisely.
That's
like,
a good point.
Like, just kind of like really step back and evaluate both like who's giving you advice, what the dynamics of the relationship are, and mentoring type of relationship it can be much more sensitive than you assume it's going to be, especially if there's some kind of power dynamic, whether it's like an older person and a younger person, or someone with lots of money and someone with less money, or someone who's dependent on somebody else. Like, I mean, in retrospect, like, or this person didn't really achieve what I thought he had achieved, and I hadn't evaluated it as carefully, like where the money really came from. And
where did the money really? Did you ever find out where the money?
Well, really came from? I mean, basically, he always had like this very small agency. It was just like him and like he had one like programmer working with him. Most of his money was just sales commissions. And then another big part is he had made a big investment in like some stock portfolio that just did fabulous, and like kind of like made a couple $1 million for him. So it wasn't like success having come from taking an agency from one or two people to like 5 or 10, or it just sort of was a different path to success. But the path that I was going down was not the path of making a good stock investment and being paid on sales commissions. so that was not the best mentor for me, even from a completely like non crazy like relationship perspective, but just on the surface.
This is another subtle and good lesson that for your mentors, like a mentor who's been successful at the sorts of things you want to do is like will ceteris paribus, everything else equal, will always be a better mentor than someone who's successful in some stock market or whatever random other thing. This is a fantastic lesson. After the story, my final question is, after that fight and it ended, since then, have you like heard about him, or like do you know how he turned out? Or
no, I mean he was older at the time, so I actually thought like maybe he would have like even passed away by now. I assume he's alive because his website is up. I've like avoided like kind of like going back and looking at it. I just went to look at it today, like once in a blue moon. Funny enough, his brother continued like and even like increased how much work he would give us. It was always like very small. It was like, can you update like, a dozen pages on my WordPress site or something. But his brother had continued to give work after that. And I don't know if there was some kind of like subtle like disagreement between them, that there was why he would continue to but I didn't want to cut him off after this thing. But yeah, other than that, I don't know like how things turned out for him. Hopefully, especially for his wife, who is like such a sweet, like nice lady. Like I just hope that, and it was sad because she, you know, she had a more functional relationship with me and my wife, and them not having kids, they kind of treated us like we were the kids, you know, in a way, and we would have dinner with them or, you know, visit with them. And so I, you know, I felt bad because it meant like ending the relationship with her as well, but he was so controlling. There was no way to like, you know, continue being friends with her and have a relationship. So yeah, that's kind of my hope, is that you know, that she's well, and that, you know, hopefully like he's also calmed down in the years, and you know, maybe things are better for him now.
People change, as we were saying about,
exactly.
about your eccentric boss. So
exactly.
So you never know.
Yeah.
This is a great story. And to wrap up, I just want to say, in addition to the great and very unique, different than all the other stories, what I think my favorite part of the story of this podcast episode is your dog on the couch in the background stretching the whole time. It makes me want to take a nap.
I know. Yes, she has the right, you know, she has the right approach to life.
that is the big lesson.
Yes.
I'm going to go stretch on the couch now and take a nap. Agreed. Just like your dog.
Agreed.
Thank you for the great story.
Oh, thank you, Morgan.
And everyone watching, thank you for making it to the end. And I hope you enjoyed watching or listening as much as we enjoyed discussing it.